welcome to the Amazon Book Review Podcast. I'm John Foro from the Amazon Books editorial team, and I'm here with fellow editor Adrian Lang. This episode is exciting for us because we have an interview with George R.R. Martin, creator of A Song of Ice and Fire, which might be more commonly known as Game of Thrones. So, Adrian, how did this conversation come about?
There's this really cool thing actually on Amazon called Author Follows, where you go to you search for a book by an author you love, let's say George R.R. Martin in this case, and you click on his name and you go to his author page, and then below his picture there's this button that says Follows, and you click on it, and then every time a new book comes out by that person, you get an email. I use this all the time for my favorite authors, and I got an alert saying that he had a new book out called Starport, which is a graphic novel. So we thought, let's see if he wants to talk to us about it. And indeed he did. So it was great. I admit I was a little nervous. I mean, we're very lucky in that we get to talk to a lot of famous authors, but he is super famous. Also, he is constantly hounded by people who want to know when book 6 of the Ice and Fire series will come out, The Winds of Winter. And I didn't want to be one of those people hounding him, but we did talk a little bit about it. We talked about Westeros. We talked about how he writes. We talk about his book's Wildcards. And then we also talk about Starport. So he was such a warm and generous person on the phone that I quickly became a lot less nervous.
All right, well, let's just get right into it then.
All right.
So I think that there's a sense out there among your book readers that the HBO adaptation of Game of Thrones is your first interaction with TV, but you just said that you've been writing TV since the 1980s.
Yes, it's by far not. Well, I have some Game of Thrones fans who think Game of Thrones was the first thing I ever did. Overlooking the fact that I had 20 years of working in this field before that. I mean, I sold my first professional sale in 1971, and I began Game of Thrones in 1991. It wasn't published till 96. So, I had 25 years of publication history writing books before Game of Thrones, but there are still people who are unaware of my other novels and all those stories that I did. And as you say, my 10 years in television.
How did writing for television affect your novel writing? And then vice versa, how did your novel writing affect your television writing?
Well, they are different. They're different disciplines, but I actually think working in television improved my novel writing. I mean, there are certain skills that you need to write good television or film. Dialogue, a good ear for dialogue. Structure has to be a little more rigorous than it is in a novel where you have the leisure, you can wander around a little bit more. Oddly enough, one of the things when you write for commercial television, which I was doing back in those days for CBS and ABC and all that, is that you have to have commercials. The form to get people by the commercials so they don't change the channel while you're trying to sell them beer or a car or whatever. You have an act break. You try to end each act. Each teleplay is divided into 4 acts or 5 acts, depending on the structure. And you end each act with an act break, which can be a cliffhanger. It doesn't have to be a cliffhanger, but that's one of the strongest act breaks, or a revelation, or a twist, or you end each chapter each act on a high note. And that's a television technique that I had to learn when I was out there. But then I carried it over. And if you look at Game of Thrones, of course, Game of Thrones is a TV show. It's a HBO. There are no commercials. Mm-hmm. Game of Thrones books, Ice and Fire books. Again, there are no commercials, but I like the technique of the act break. And if you look at most of my chapters, they end on a twist or a cliffhanger or something that'll hook you. So you're reading a Tyrion chapter and it ends, and you immediately want the next Tyrion chapter. But of course, you don't get it. You don't get a commercial either. You get an Arya chapter or a Jon Snow chapter or whatever. And that gives the books a certain propulsive thing. So that's a technique that I picked up in television that I think is a good technique.
Has that technique also just helped you in your writings, that as you jump from chapter to chapter, character to character, as you as a writer, does it help you bring you back to wanting to continue that character's story as well?
Well, yes and no. I don't write the books in the order in which you read the books. Say I'm writing Tyrion, and I write a Tyrion chapter, I'd probably go right on and write the next Tyrion chapter, and then I write the Tyrion chapter after that. I'll be in a Tyrion groove for a while. And at some point, I get too far ahead of the other characters, or I just hit a problem I say, okay, I'll leave Tyrion for a while, and then I go back and change my head to a different setting and get into Arya and write an Arya chapter. But then, after all the chapters are written, I have to weave them together, which itself is a challenging thing. You would be startled to know how many thousands of times I reorder the chapters in some of these books to try to get to the ultimate thing that works in terms of the chronology, but also works in terms of drama and the chapters reflecting on each other and bouncing off each other and having a contrast or continuity. It's very challenging, and I change my mind a lot before I come up with what you ultimately see in the books.
When you're moving the chapters around, is this like physically cutting and pasting in a Word document, or do you have Post-it notes all over the place? Are you storyboarding? How is that? How does that work?
No, it's moving blocks of computer text around.
Okay.
But it's not in a Word document because I hate Word. I'm very old school. I write my novels on a DOS machine using WordStar.
Wow.
It's getting increasingly harder to hold on to WordStar because it's not supported anymore. Even DOS isn't supported anymore. Even computer guys, harder and harder to find one who knows what he's doing. But I'm an old school guy who's set in his ways, so it works for me, and it enables me to forget about all the outside world and get lost in wherever I'm writing about, whether it's Starport or Westeros or Wild Cards, any of those things.
I actually wanted to ask you about Wild Cards. So can you tell me about how it started and how you continue to be involved with it?
Well, it's actually my oldest series. It's because Wild Cards started like 5 years before Game of Thrones. Go all the way back. I'm a comic book fan. I mean, I was a comic book nerd when I was a kid. I was there for the beginning of the Marvel age of comics, first Spider-Man, Fantastic Fours. I wrote letters to Stan Lee that were published in some of those issues. And so I always loved comics and superheroes. And then in the 80s, I moved to New Mexico, and I got involved with some of the other writers down there in a role-playing group. And one of the role-playing games we played was a game called Super World, which was a superhero role-playing game. And I was actually the game master for that. And I ran it for my friends for 3-4 years. And it became completely addictive. I mean, we really had fun, and people created great characters. The people in my group, people like Walter John Williams and Vic Milan and Melinda Snodgrass, John Miller, these were all writers. So we were not just rolling dice and fighting monsters. We were creating characters and doing a lot of, it was almost like improv theater, bouncing off each other. It was a huge amount of fun. But at a certain point, it became too addictive. And I was saying, well, these characters are too good just to be wasted among the 10 of us here playing this game. In the 80s, shared worlds were very big. Thieves' World has been the first successful one, and there were a dozen others. But no one had done a superhero shared world, so I thought there was an opportunity for Wildcard. So I pitched it and sold it, and I've been editing it ever since. We have, like 30 books, either published, like 27 of them, I think, are in print, 3 more in the pipeline. We've had comic book spin-offs, we've had game spin-offs, and we have 2 TV series in development right now for Hulu. And we got more in the pipeline. A new Wildcard story went up today on Tor.com, which by Marco Cluse, as a matter of fact, how to move spheres and influence people, which people can check out for free on Tor.com. We had our first all-British Wildcard book, Knaves Over Queens, which has been published in the UK. The American edition isn't out yet. And we had Low Chicago and Texas Hold'em, both of which I think are terrific books. I hope some of my fans, some of my Ice and Fire fans will check out some of this other stuff, because it all means a lot to me. It's like, I love Ice and Fire and its characters, but I love Wild Cards too, and I love my old Thousand World series. It's they're all my children, my literary children, and I think if you like one of my things, hopefully you'll like some of the other stuff that I'm associated with.
My understanding is that role-playing games are basically an all-time high right now. Do you still play?
Sadly, no. Life intervened. People went their separate ways, and the old band split up, and everybody's off doing their own things now. I miss it, though. It's too time-consuming. As you know, I mean, we're not talking about Winds of Winter, but as everybody in the world knows, Winds of Winter is way later than it should have been. And there's a tremendous amount of pressure on me to finish it. And realistically speaking, I've had to put aside or give up a lot of things that I would I enjoy doing because they're too time consuming. They're too attention. I just have to try to focus on Winds of Winter and get it done. So I've cut down on my travel. I've cut down on my conventions. I haven't cut out entirely the role-playing games, which can become very addictive. It's almost like writing a book, but instead you're designing a game and 6 people enjoy it instead of 6 million people. So I'm not doing that anymore. Now, maybe when I finish Game of Thrones and or the Ice and Fire series, 2 more books, and then I finish some things beyond that, maybe I can get back and do some more of it and have enjoy that. But that's still a few years away.
How has the stress of these books affected your life, knowing that so many people are waiting for them?
Well, it's been some mixed bag. Most writers, including myself, struggle all their careers to have attention, to have people who are fans of theirs who are eager for their next book. Most people, your book comes out and it's like throwing it down a well. You've worked on this book for a year or 2 years and it's published, and then a couple reviews appear, and that's the end of it, and then you get your royalty statement. And I've certainly been there. I mean, I was a pretty successful writer by the standards of science fiction fantasy. And in the 70s and the 80s, I won awards, and I never had any trouble getting my stuff published and all of that. And I made a decent living. But this is a whole other thing. I mean, these are books that go on the bestseller list and stay there for ages. And now when I show up for an autograph party, I don't have, in the old days in the 70s, I would do a autographing at a Walden Books and 8 people would come. Now it's more likely to be 8,000 people. That's very gratifying in one sense. But in the other sense, yes, you're right. There's a tremendous amount of pressure. It's sometimes you feel like there are millions of people looking over your shoulder, and some of them are very, very impatient, which honestly I don't understand. It's certainly different from when I was younger. I mean, I read series, and sometimes I say, "Well, there's the next book coming out." Oh, it's not out yet. I just read something else. But my fans, or at least a portion of my fans, are very impatient and are always sending me emails where no matter what I tweet about, there's an element of people, well, when is Winds of Winter coming out? It doesn't matter if I'm tweeting about, hey, Starport just came out. Oh, good. When is Winds of Winter coming out? Oh, the Giants made a terrible trade. Oh, okay. When is Winds of Winter coming out? My cat just died. When is Winds of Winter coming out? It doesn't matter. It's all, So that gets a little old, but, Winds of Winter will come out, and I fully expect that the day after it comes out, I will get the first email that says, so when is The Dream of Spring coming out? So, there it is.
I understand that your Hugo Losers Party is the best party at the Hugo Awards. So how did that start?
That started in 1976 at the convention called Mid-Americon, the Kansas City, Missouri Worldcon. I was up for 2 Hugo Awards at that convention, and I lost them both. And my friend Gardner Dozois was up for a Hugo Award, and he lost as well. So we were sitting around afterwards, and I think we were in the bar, and we saw the winners. The winners had their Hugos. They were carrying around. They were in the bar. They were laughing and toasting each other and having a great old time, a great old party. And we were sitting here at the table saying, there ought to be a party for the losers too. So the next night, we used my hotel room, and we scavenged, because we were losers. We didn't have a lot of money in those days. We scavenged leftover booze from the other parties. We went around. We managed to get, like box wine and some Jarrett beer and a few other weird things and a few bowls of peanuts and cheese curls. And we had a party in my room, and we called it the Hugo Losers Party. And you had to get in, you had to tell why you were a loser. And even the winners came. They showed up, and we wouldn't let them in. We threw peanuts at them and said, no winners admitted, only losers. So the winners had to say, well, maybe I won, but I'm really a loser because I've lost the last 6 times I've been up, or, and funny things like that. And it became a really popular party. It became a tradition. We did it again the next year and the year after that. And I ran it for most of the 70s and into the 80s until I got involved in television. And then I couldn't run it anymore because it took a lot of planning, and it continued, but it became a tradition that the following year's Worldcon would do it. And during the years that other people were running it, it became suddenly very stuffy. People started regulating the membership, who could get in and who could not come in, and limiting the attendance. And there was even a few years where they said, oh, people don't like being called losers. Let's call it the post-Yugo nominee reception or something like that. Something very pretentious and all that. It got worse and worse. And finally, after a particularly bad one that I attended, I said, I'm taking this back. Gardner and I started this party. So I started running it again. And I've run it now for like 4 years. And we've restored it to its roots. You still, it's for losers. The winners can come, but we make them wear silly hats and, humiliate themselves. And we toast each other, the losers, and sometimes I give out Alfie awards. So it's a lot of fun. And it is the best party at Worldcon, I think. This whole awards thing is complicated. It has changed a lot since I entered the field. There's a lot of campaigning that goes on. The internet has changed everything. People do eligibility posts this year where writers on their websites or blogs are saying, oh, here's all the stuff I had that's eligible. And I do that myself now because you have to. Otherwise, you get ignored. It's becoming more and more like the Emmys or the Oscars. I vote for some of those too. I'm a member of the Writers Guild, which gives awards, and I'm a member of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences that vote on the Emmys. And I get all of these for your consideration discs of movies and television shows and all that. And if you don't do that, if someone has a television show and they don't send out a free for your consideration disc, then they don't get considered. They get overlooked. Now that's what happened to the Yugos too. All the writers, and I'm not trying to criticize other people because I have to do this myself too. You do these for your consideration posts and say, here's the stuff I have. I hope you all consider it when it comes around. And if you don't do that, then you probably won't be nominated, or people will forget about you because there's so much to choose from. So that's the reality of how the Yugos have changed. But honestly, I miss there was a certain purity in the old days where, you just publish your story and then the Yugo nominations come out. There was no campaigning. There was no people sending out copies of their stories or putting it, oh, here's my story for free on the internet. You can read it and then vote for it. There was none of that. You were just published in Analog or FNSF, and if the fans happened to notice your story and you were nominated, it was very simple and very pure. Of course, it was also very small. If you look at the statistics of those days, like the early 70s, you get on the ballot with like 30 people noticing your story.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's a lot bigger, but the more things change, right? Things are always gonna change.
What have you read and enjoyed lately?
Well, I'm reading a new Marco Cluse novel right now. I'm only halfway through, but I'm enjoying it a lot. He's one of my wildcard writers. He did the Frontlines series for you guys.
Right.
Is he one of your authors? Yeah, he's terrific.
Yeah, he's one
terrific.
of Amazon publishing authors.
And he writes mostly military SF, but he's also done some great wildcards work for me. So we brought him into the consortium. Rebecca Roanhorse, her book Trail of Lightning, I think that's probably going to be on the Yugo ballot this year. She won the Campbell Award last year and also a short story award from New Mexico, up and coming author, I think. And last summer, I was a guest at a thriller convention in New York called Thriller Fest, and they gave me the Thriller Master Award, which was presented to me by Lee Child. And I'd never read any of his books before, but he was going to give me this award, so I said, well, I should try one of his books before I meet this guy. And I picked up one of his Jack Reacher books. Boy, what a page turner that was. So then I picked up another one, and I've become completely addicted to these Jack Reacher books. They're like literary crack. I can't, I just read one and then I grab another. I think, and there's a lot of them. I'm almost done with all of them now, but just since last July, I think I've read everything Lee Child has written, and they're all enormously entertaining. Bernard Cornwell, that's another one. I read his latest Saxon book, the Last Kingdom series. Very good TV series based on that, too. Uhtred, son of Uhtred, and father of Uhtred, and brother of Uhtred. It's a whole family of people named Uhtred.
So instead of thinking about books you've read recently, do you remember the book that you read that turned you into a reader, like really turned you on to books as a pastime?
Sure. Robert A. Heinlein, Have Space It Will Travel. Although Citizen Galaxy is very good too. But yes, that was given to me when I was, 10, 11 years old. I'd been a comic book reader, but I wasn't reading a lot of books per se, and then I read that one, and there was no looking back.
My conversation with George R. R. Martin covered a lot of territory, but I was supposed to be talking with him about his graphic novel Starport, which had hit shelves in early March. So here's what he told me about how Starport came to be.
Do you want to talk about Starport, though? So it recently came out just at the beginning of this month, right?
Yeah, that's my newest, it's my newest and my oldest book simultaneously. Of course, but most of the work that I actually did on it, I did in 1994. It was a television pilot that I developed for Fox way back when. I spent about 10 years in television from the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s. I was on a writer-producer on Twilight Zone and did a little work on Max Headroom, and then I was on Beauty and the Beast for all 3 years of its run. And then I did about 5 years of development, or as they sometimes call it, development hell, where I was creating pilots for my own shows and writing feature films. And it was very, very lucrative and a lot of fun in some ways, but also very frustrating because unlike working on a show where, you write a script and you rewrite it and then they shoot it and it gets on the air, in development, you're doing all this work, and then most things don't get made, and none of mine actually got made. And it was good money. After 5 years, I said, I can't do this anymore. I need an audience. I don't want to spend a year of my life developing things that nobody ever gets to see except 4 guys in the room. And Starport was one of those. It was one of my favorites. It was a science fiction cop show that we developed for Fox, and they seemed to love it and love it and love it, and then they passed on it. So it has languished until Rhea Golden, very talented friend, decided that it would make a good material to adopt as a graphic novel. So she really took it and picked it up and ran with it. And my script was from 1994. There were 2 versions of it, a first and second draft that were somewhat different. My first drafts are always too long, so I had to cut things for the second draft and rearrange a few things. But she combined the 2 drafts, added back some of the stuff I'd cut, and updated a lot of the stuff that had become, a little obsolete with the passage of time, like my jokes about VHS recorders. And a few things like that. And, gave everybody cell phones, all of that. And, of course, then she illustrated it and did a beautiful job. I was delighted to look at it and see her art and see how the adaptation worked. It was fun and makes me wish all over again that Fox had decided to make the series back in 1994. I think it would have been a good series. There's nothing quite like it, even since. So I hope the readers out there, the comic book and graphic novel fans and science fiction fans will enjoy it.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. It was wonderful talking to you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Take care.